It's time to make a return to the Dolphin Emulator, but maybe in an unexpected way, since earlier in the week, the brilliant minds behind the Dolphin Emulator, which has allowed us to enjoy Gamecube and Wii emulation for many years across all sorts of devices, has now reintegrated support into the mainline branch for what I consider the third pillar, completing the Triforce, which is the arcade offshoot of hardware based on the Gamecube. In this video, we will go through the full setup process on Android, including some settings that will get you going without issue, and of course, as always, a games showcase, albeit a mini one. So please join me, Rob the Retro Tech Dad, as we go back to Dolphin and complete the Triforce. Now, I think before we dive into the actual emulation setup, let's very briefly talk about Triforce and what it is for those that might be unfamiliar with the name and hardware. I definitely recommend going to the Dolphin website, where the team wrote up a wonderful blog entry talking about this significant update for Dolphin, which also has an awesome detailed write-up about the history and deep dive into the hardware and challenges of getting this often forgotten arcade platform. Triforce, as its name implies, was a joint effort between three companies: Nintendo, Sega, and Namco. The goal was simple: build an arcade platform based on the Gamecube hardware, and at the time it was kind of a wild proposition, especially seeing Nintendo and Sega team up to deliver this. It was also very exciting because each company brought a unique perspective to an arcade project, with Nintendo's strong IP, Sega's experience with arcade hardware, and of course Namco's expertise delivering arcade-style gaming experiences. The hardware itself was quite literally a GameCube that was enclosed within a metal shell that added a bunch of various arcade-specific components, and much of it resembled some of Sega's own arcade hardware, like the Naomi platform, which Triforce is often considered a follow-up to. Sadly, we didn't see a large number of games developed using the platform, with a total of just 9 games released, and out of those, some would be ported to home platforms, as well as some just being lost to audiences outside of Japan because of the cost and need for translation. The standouts for the Triforce platform include both Mario Kart Arcade GP and its sequel, as well as F-Zero AX, the arcade companion to F-Zero GX on the Gamecube. Without a doubt, most will be very excited to play the Mario Kart Arcade GP games, as these have never been ported to a home console platform. And surprisingly, this Mario Kart game was not developed by Nintendo. Instead, Namco led development for both games, adding their own touch to the formula, including Namco characters like Pac-Man. So how do we get this all to work on Android? Well, thankfully it's mostly a simple setup, since the team at Dolphin has made some aspects a bit easier to manage, such as the controller setup, which is now mapped to work as a Gamecube controller. So first things first, let's head on over to the Dolphin website and then to the download page, where we can download the latest development version by scrolling just a bit down to the development versions section. Now, at the time of publishing this video, it will be version 2512-397. And so any version past this one should be good to go. At the time of this video, it has not been integrated into the Play Store version, so for the time being, this is the way to get Dolphin with Triforce support. Since this is a tutorial for Android, let's click on the Android version, which will download the latest APK file that we need to install Dolphin, and this shouldn't take too long. Once downloaded, just click on Install. Now, you might get a warning to allow Chrome or whatever browser you're using to install unknown apps. Just toggle it on in settings and then you can proceed to install. Okay, let's now open up Dolphin for the first time and get some things going. You will get a pop-up to allow usage reporting. I usually just hit no for this step and then continue on. So let's now go through some of the important settings to get started here, and these will be our default settings for Triforce specifically. If you tap on the gear icon in the top right corner, we have a few options available to us. So from here, we will go into the config option and then into general, and here we will want to enable cheats so that we can make use of specific cheats for Mario Kart Arcade GP and the sequel. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, we can also enable the save states option, which is nice to have since you can use this as a way to quickly save progress and jump right back in. And that's all we need to worry about here in the config section. So let's go back to settings and now head into the graphics settings. For Triforce, I recommend just leaving it on the OpenGL backend, especially for those that might be using a Snapdragon 8 Elite device like I am here for testing. Now for the aspect ratio, the games were originally presented in the 4:3 aspect ratio, but I do like to make use of my screen real estate, and so I will go ahead and use the Force 16:9 option. but choose whatever option you prefer. Now right below that we have the enhancements, and here we can make use of resolution scaling to make the image look really nice and sharp. Now since I'm on an Odin 3, the resolution here is 1080p, so I don't really recommend going beyond the 3x upscaling. But if you are planning on doing video out, the 6x option is great for 4K output. This setting is also very dependent on your hardware. Devices like the Odin 3 and the Snapdragon 8 Elite, as well as the 8 Elite Gen 5 and even the Retroid Pocket 6 with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, will have more than enough power to push the max upscaling, but you might need to adjust this depending on your device. So if you're on something older like a Retroid Pocket 5, you might need to lower the upscaling. Finally, if you want to have things like the FPS overlay on screen, you can go to statistics and then toggle on the options as you like. Okay, so let's now talk about setting up the controls, and the team at Dolphin actually made it so that you can basically map to a standard GameCube controller layout. So under settings, go to the GameCube input option, and for the GameCube controller 1, tap on this to make the selection for Triforce base board, and then tap on the gear icon to the right. This is where we can map our built-in controls on our Android handhelds to the way that we like. So as you can see on screen, I'm going through and mapping each button by selecting it and then pressing down on the one that I want it mapped to. If you scroll down a bit, there's a section added for Triforce specifically. And since we have some buttons that are available to us, we can make use of those extra inputs to map the test, service, and coin input. The coin input by default is mapped to the motion, so if you shake the handheld, a coin will be inserted. It's nice to be able to map the test and service, which I've done to the L3 and R3 since they're not being utilized. The service button is especially nice because it allows us to bring up the service menu, which allows us to make all sorts of cool changes for the game specifically. More on that in just a moment. Okay, let's now go back to the main screen of Dolphin, and now we can add our games directory by tapping on the bottom right button that says Add Games. Now I happen to have my Triforce games in a Triforce specific folder, but you can actually keep them with your other games like Gamecube and it will still populate. The games need to be in their .iso format, and they're not very large. Now I obviously can't share where to get the games from, but there's an organization out there that likes to archive a lot of this stuff, so it's a good place to check. With the directory selected, now the Triforce games will show up under the Gamecube tab. You can see here that I've added F-Zero AX, Mario Kart Arcade GP, and of course the sequel. So let's go ahead and launch our first game, which is going to be Mario Kart Arcade GP, and I am specifically using the US version of the game. Now on the first launch, you might have the touch controls overlay on screen, and it's pretty easy to get rid of this just by swiping in from the left or pressing the dedicated back button, and then going to the overlay controls, and then the toggle controls option, and selecting toggle all, which will remove it. You might notice that we have an issue here. It says to please call an attendant. It's a good thing that you've got me, and so you don't actually need to do that. What we do need to do now is set up some cheat codes for this game and for Mario Kart Arcade GP2 in order to bypass some of the pre-checks, since it's not really relevant here. Okay, so let's exit the game, and now if we tap on the specific game and hold, we will get a pop-up menu that allows us to make per game changes. And since we already enabled cheats earlier in this video, we can scroll down to the Edit Cheats option. This brings up the cheats menu, and if you scroll down just a little bit, we can add a Gecko cheat code. Now I will have the cheat codes for your convenience in my description area, so you can simply copy and paste the code. But we do need to enter two separate codes for both Mario Kart Arcade GP games. The first code is the skip boot check. So enter that for the name and then hit next, and let's scroll down to the code section and enter or paste the code, which is 040320FC space 6 and then 7 zeros, which should follow, and then hit done and then tap OK. If you tap on the back arrow in the top left, we are taken back to the cheat screen, and so make sure that this is toggled on. Okay, let's add the second code, which is the skip link check. Now enter that for the name and then enter or paste the code 04032410 space 6 and then 7 zeros to follow. Tap done, then OK, and go back and then check that it's enabled. I do recommend going back to the home screen and then going back to the edit sheets just to make sure everything is enabled, since it can be a little bit glitchy here. Okay, now we are ready to boot Mario Kart again. Just kidding, we've got actually one last thing that is ideal to configure, which is addressing the prompt that appeared at the bottom. Now if you notice, we don't have access to the service menu, even though I mapped a button for that. The service menu allows us to make all sorts of cool changes in the backend. Now in order to access this, we need to add the Sega BIOS for this, and unfortunately, I'm not able to share that specific file here, but a quick Google search should get you to a wiki, and the file that you are looking for is Segaboot.GCM, and once you found that file, we need to now place it in the correct location. Unfortunately, we do need to go onto the Play Store and get a file explorer that will allow us to navigate into the Android folders for Dolphin. You can use any file manager that you prefer. Now, I'm using the EX file manager, but really many of the ones available on the Play Store will work just fine. Once you've installed a file manager, open it up, and let's now navigate to the download folder where you downloaded the Segaboot.GCM file. Tap and hold to select the boot file and then tap on copy, and now we can place a copy in the Dolphin directory, which is located in the Android folder, then in the data folder, and depending on how much you have installed, you might need to scroll down a bit, but the folder we want is org.dolphinemu.dolphin, and then the files folder, and finally the Triforce folder, and here we can paste the Segaboot.GCM file. Whew, okay, now we can go back to Mario Kart Arcade GP and actually play this game. And if you've noticed, we've got no more error messages and issues, and everything should be bypassed and we should be on the title screen for the game. We can also use this as an opportunity to quickly check out the service menu, which I personally mapped to L3, and when I press down on it, you can see that we have the system menu, and here we can make some changes like enable free play, and for F-Zero AX, for example, we can adjust the difficulty. I also like to go into the game options and turn off the card game feature, but this is all totally optional. Okay, so back to Mario Kart Arcade GP, and this is just a blast to see her working on Android. It brings me so much joy to be able to play this game on one of my Android devices like the Odin 3 here. This game is a ton of fun and surprisingly has a lot more content than one might think given its arcade nature. Best of all, you can easily save progress with a save state and of course play as much as you want without draining tons of quarters. So let's now check out Mario Kart Arcade GP 2, but before we even dive into the game, let's quickly set up our cheat codes for this, which I will go through much faster since we already covered adding cheats in the Mario Kart Arcade GP section. Again, for this we will need two separate cheats, which is the same as before, one to skip the boot check and the other to skip the link check. I will have both codes in the description area for your convenience. But once those two codes are entered and enabled, the game is ready to go, and since we already took care of the Sega boot issue, we also have access to the service menu. But this is so cool to see here since, I don't know about everyone else, but I've always loved playing both of the Mario Kart arcade games. And definitely have spent a good amount of money enjoying them in the arcade, and the fact that we can enjoy them now on our Android devices and on handhelds like the Odin 3 really makes me so happy. Mario Kart Arcade GP2 is even better than the original and lots of fun to play, so at least for these two Mario Kart games, I think it's worth the effort to set up. Now there is one other game that definitely stands out from the Triforce, which is F-Zero AX, and this one does work, but there is a very long motor initialization setup on the first boot. This probably takes a good minute or two before you are finally presented with the option to calibrate your controls. So follow the calibration and then press start to finish. The good news is once you've done this, the game will then launch. Now a little trick to bypass this every time is just to make a save state at the title screen. Now I'm not sure if it's just me, but the game's controls are a little weird with the analog stick, and I don't know if it's an issue with the way the game interprets the analog stick here, but I did try this again on the Retro Pocket 6, and it's similar, so take that for what you will. I found that it's best to treat the stick like it's a flight stick, if that makes any sense, where you want to pull back on the stick and then move left and right in a very subtle way since the game is very sensitive to inputs. Even with this, it's still worth experimenting if you've already gone through the process to check out the Mario Kart games. And speaking of, there are a few other games that were on the Triforce, including entries in the Virtua Striker series from Sega, an interesting baseball game that is heavily in Japanese, as well as an RPG that is also very Japanese heavy. And that's all for this video. I hope this will be helpful for those that might be curious about this neat piece of history from the Gamecube era, and of course for emulation with Dolphin and its preservation of the Triforce platform, especially when it comes to experiencing these games on Android. This was a really cool surprise this week, and so I actually have plans for a completely different video, which will be dropping very shortly. But until then, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.